we're doing today is having a conversation about things we've all experienced, and really, I basically kind of pulled together from some older projects and some current projects, some of the points of friction, I guess you could say, that I and my team have experienced in actually engaging with people in foresight and futures thinking in a variety of organizations. So I'm going to sort of skip lightly through some examples, some um, potholes and road bumps that we've noticed, and some of the rules of thumb that we're kind of developing on the fly every day. We recently had a team meeting where we went through some of the projects we've just finished up and had a kind of exercise on, wow, what worked, what didn't work, what were we happy about, what was the client happy about, what will we do better next time? An exercise that's really useful, and I certainly encourage all of you and your teams to go through when we do this. I really am trying to raise points that I hope will spark memories in all of your minds about experiences you had practicing futures work, so that we can really have a lively sort of 40-minute community of practice. Yeah, here's what happened to me and here's what I did about it conversation. So let me um, share screen. And this is quite a long title for, again, what I hope will be a relatively informal tour of some of the common problems we all run into on the road to working with people successfully to complete any kind of foresight project. And I've tried to pull examples from across the range of foresight projects. Now, one of the things that happened when I said to my team, oh, what are some of the things that, have just made you go, oh my God, this is going to be a tough one, is, a classic list of responses you get, starting with ministers saying, yeah, scenarios, why would we do that? We don't do speculation. Presenting great scenarios work to the then agency chief executive and doing our best to frame what it does, what it doesn't do, where the data came from, how the scenarios were enabling our ability to think about contingencies and alternative possibilities, and having the agency chief ask the classic question, wow, really interesting, really great. Which is the right one? Which one are we going for? Which is the preferred future? Even better, at a launch event, is getting also another classic response to futures work. The trouble with scenarios is that they are not nearly scientific enough, which was followed by the gem that is eternally burned into my brain. Well, these are all well and good, but I'm not going to be alive in 2060, so I don't really care what the future looks like, from a senior government leader. And then the one that kind of floored me once was a government science lead asking an agency, typo, advisory group, why should I use futures rather than systems thinking? Now, I'm hoping all the rest of you are going, but wait, futures thinking is systems thinking. So this is sort of, some of the responses that we get. Other bumps in the road are when you would most want to have support for a futures project, because quite frankly, this is a new form of thinking for an awful lot of people trained in other disciplines or with expertise in other professions. You have a project lead that kind of starts you off and then is kind of absent or unengaged, or their immediate reports are. Clients stuck in the present, in the current state of play, in current assumptions. Collaboration frictions. So in futures, to really enhance our understanding of both the systems with which we are engaging and how they are evolving, it helps to have a very wide diversity of perspectives, but obviously the more diversity of perspective, the more potential for miscommunication, mistranslation, conflict. As an approach to, answering the oft repeated point about futures, this is not rigorous. Of course, we all tend to engage in mission creep about collecting all the data we can, particularly in scanning, or at least our team does. And then you end up with more research data and analysis than actually fits into a report that can be communicated clearly, which also leads to the often sort of bumpiness of how effective your reporting assets are. Do I create a dry scientific report that shows all the data? Do I create something engaging that has a lot of pictures or videos or artwork or graphics, or is experiential, but then gets rejected because it's not rigorous enough? So these are issues we all face. And and as an additional sort of summary on our road to doing futures work, excuse me, I'm sorry, we are always ourselves navigating and attempting to help our clients, our partners, the people we're working with, our colleagues in an agency and organization, navigate complex, turbulent, ambiguous contexts. Often the assignment itself is ill-defined, the focus isn't clear. As the previous set of quotes and examples indicate, we face widely varied client foresight awareness. Often it's a case of, I've been assigned to do a foresight project. I'm not sure what that is, but you're going to help me with it. Or I want to engage in foresight, but I'm not entirely clear what that is, or what it entails, or what some of the risks are. The consistent issue of people, especially from certain kinds of scientific backgrounds, saying there is no rigor in this discipline. There's no discipline in this discipline. That constant tension that leaders have between the need to control process and outcomes, especially in government, so as not to be controversial, versus the need to honestly explore potentials and possibilities and the surprises they might face. The tension between maintaining that balance between exclusivity and expert opinion and perspectives and analysis to offer some rigor in thinking and in data, versus the very real need to be inclusive and participatory and engage all members of the public, all voices, frequently marginalized people in the process. And the tension that we've recently, in a project we were working with the University of Utrecht, the Deep Transitions team, we've come to characterize as the tension between optimizing current systems versus transforming systems to something that might be more sustainable. So, and we're doing all of that with a fairly complex set of concepts, approaches, theories of change, potential, a wide array of futures tools and foresight tools, a great diversity of routes to engaging with those tools, from the very expert and desk-based to the widely participatory. So we're dealing with ourselves a very complex disciplinary environment. So just to walk you through some of the experiences that I have, that I want to offer as examples. In one of the very first pieces of work that I was doing for what was then called the Horizon Scanning Center of Excellence in the UK advisory, the UK Office of Science and Technology, we did a pilot project in scanning and assembling a scanning database. And there was an advisory group, and so people that we were reporting to as we built the database, as we added a variety of analytical tools to sort of be able to slice through the different emerging issues, trends, and changes that we were finding. And the attendance at the advisory group was sort of intermittent by some people. And on the final day, when we'd finished the project and we were uh, presenting kind of here's the results, here is sort of the initial scan and analysis. Here are some of the emerging issues that we think could potentially be something that you need to watch in terms of science, technology, and innovation for policymaking. And one of the advisory group members, who quite frankly hadn't been there up until that point, sat listening to us with her jaw dropping, and she looked at some of the emerging issues that we were presenting. So, in terms of emerging issues analysis and the S curve of maturity of change, we were down on the far left corner of here's some wild ideas that are cropping up and they challenge current paradigms, and data is still being collected. But she just saw the summary and went, how can you possibly say that? The scientists haven't agreed, and went off on this sort of critical tirade about how we were being irresponsible about bringing to, a government policy agency scientific, what we were calling scientific insights that hadn't been fully confirmed. And we had to make the point that this is not the end of research. Scanning is not the end of research, it's the beginning of monitoring. Of course, if we spot a change early where someone is just suggesting that new data has come in that might challenge a paradigm, there will be contention. Scientists will disagree. Experts will disagree. So, at its very base, one of the first potholes we run into is that distinction between the scientific perspective that you want to have a rich evidence base that proves what you're saying versus the emerging issues analysis concept that you are identifying novel ideas and data that may contradict standing assumptions in order to monitor a change as it grows. So there are a lot of design tensions in scanning between this idea of content control, robustness of evidence, expert models versus diversity of perspective that might make it more likely that you pick up emerging changes, broad audience, different cultural perspectives, continuous and rolling updates that acknowledge that change is occurring and change is evolving, and the change may not yet be mature. So we have to keep an eye on it. And the change may entirely fall and fail. And so we move on to monitoring another change that may actually mature into a major trend. So that's one of the issues that we're constantly dealing with and requires a certain nuance of communication and scanning. So in terms of thinking about the impacts of change, another project, we work a lot with the Law Society UK, who are always interested in how changes might affect the legal profession and raise new issues. So with them, we were working on a recent project on the growing human activity in space and the implications for the legal profession. So we were talking about raising emerging issues among their network, thinking systemically about, thinking systemically about the current state of play in terms of human activities in space and the current regulations and legal frameworks, exploring potentialities in emergent properties and reflecting on the implications. So one of the first things we did was sort of build a timeline of, well, how did we get to the current level of human activities in space? And what was your first work in space? How did you relate? What are the things you noticed? What is the points, the events or changes that you can add? we had them build a system map. And one of the things that we found very important in all of our work, quite frankly, is to maintain a good sense of humor. Because helping people both recognize change and laugh about it, laugh about how surprising it might be, laugh about some of its implications, helps them remember. When we are smiling about something, it tends to embed itself more deeply in our memory. Making sure that we cover the past, the present, and the future. Making sure that we are, in fact, systemic. Yes, futures thinking is systems thinking. And also that we're critical about not only what the current state of play is, but what it leaves out. And then when we're thinking about changes that might affect it, really asking where do the changes land on the current state of play, and what does that mean for us? In this case, what does that mean for the legal profession and what they might want to do? And as I said, we have been kind of thinking hard about in our team about each particular project and where the um, where the high speed smooth stretches of road are and where the bumpy parts are. And one of the things that was interesting about this particular project was that potentially you'd think human futures in space is not the most immediately important issue for a professional society in law to be addressing. But it is emerging. And actually, on the day we held this, there were, let's see, China was bringing back samples from the far side of the moon, and I think SpaceX was launching Starship, the fifth Starship launch. So much is going on these days that it is certainly an emerging change. What was interesting from the group of people who attended this participatory session was that they were frequently the only people in their law firm who were dealing with any space law issues at all. And the overwhelming feeling was one of enthusiasm and relief, and in fact, joy that they had found a community to talk about the emerging possibilities in this field. That they had been offered space to talk about, sorry, that was unintentional. They'd been offered a venue to talk about where things might be going in their profession vis-a-vis what was clearly going to be a burgeoning new activity commercially as well as governmentally um, of human beings in terms of exploration, scientific understanding, and commercial application. So this sense of I found my tribe was important. And one of the outcomes was for the Law Society was the sense that there was enthusiasm for continuing and expanding this, and this desire to build a community of practice, and recognition that Foresight was useful in structuring provocative, sort of leading edge conversations in a way that helped them think both systemically and imaginatively and critically and raise provocative questions. So, and I'll come back to that community of practice and support in a bit. Right. So we recently finished actually the largest project that we were working on for the past year was for the World Organization of Animal Health, their 100th anniversary Foresight project. To some extent, this was designed to be a capacity building project within WOA to expand the familiarity with foresight and futures thinking and to expand their comfort with and use of different futures and foresight tools. And it involved an international a set of international workshops featuring participants from WOA and from the International Veterinary Students Association, about 60 people from all over the world, to build to assess the outcome of a short stint of scanning, horizon scanning, that we, the research team, had done for them, and sense make the emerging issues and changes, and use those to build scenarios and use the scenarios to think through what adaptive actions WOA might want to take. And again, one of the interesting amounts of feedback that we got from participants was this sort of, on the one hand, this was not rigorous enough, and there was too much fantasy, and we sort of went all over the place in imagining these futures. To wow, there was so much data and detail, and so much information about emerging changes and trends that got built into every scenario. So in a way, I sort of take that as a win, right? Some of the people thought it was too detailed and too rigorous, and others thought it wasn't rigorous enough. But we thought that from our perspective, the participants really got quite out there in being provocative about some of the details in the scenarios, to the point where we were a little nervous when it was presented to the very senior person in the organization, some of the very senior people, because we weren't sort of sure whether or not they would think, oh, those futurists, they're wild and crazy folks. What were they thinking? And in fact, the response was, oh, yes, we see how these futures might emerge. They are provocative, they are challenging, but they each contain issues that we clearly see the roots of in changes that are occurring today. So we felt that was a bit of a triumph in terms of the fact that, again, the scenarios were created by the participants, and clearly they had done a very good job of connecting changes visible today through their potential impacts to a range of very different possible futures. But we will always have to, address the issue that is consistently raised by people from especially scientific and technical backgrounds of, this is fantasy. The kind of, and you get paid to do this? Wow. The deep transitions futures was not scenarios. It was trying to create a set of preferred futures for a just and sustainable society as part of helping an international investment panel think through what an investment philosophy would be to guide investment fund managers in building portfolios that would, instead of contributing to the ongoing materialist, consumerist, capitalist society, actually enable a bit of a push towards a just, sustainable future. The difficulty is, International Advisory Panel, we understood that we were trying to explore different paths to different sustainable futures, because quite frankly, different perfectly valid value sets would create visions, stories of preferred futures that are both just and sustainable, and yet look different from other sets of value choices. So we needed to have a range of possible preferred futures that people could consider. And the Deep Transitions Futures Investment Panel were facilitated in articulating 3 different possible futures. And there was still the issue raised when we started presenting these publicly of, well, whose vision is this? Who's controlling this vision? And we kept saying, well, there are actually 3 different ones, and it was an international advisory panel. And then very, rightfully, the criticism was raised, but yes, but these are investors. These are people at, they may be either the center of the center or the center of the periphery, but they're all at the top of the economic pile. So their perspective is, shall we say, skewed. So really you needed more diversity. Well, yes, but the point of this was not to create, this project was not to create preferred futures for the planet. It was to create a set of contrasting preferred futures that would help them stress test the investment philosophy and sort of investment checklist that they were trying to create. That was the point of the project. So we actually felt that we had done a good job when we wrote up the 3 visions that they had sketched out during the visioning process. We wrote them up as narratives and reflected the narratives back to them. And several of the panel members looked at one of the visions, and said, oh, well, that's obviously the preferred future. Why are we even bothering with these other two? And other panel members looked at those two and went, are you mad? That is an insane. That's who would want that future? Obviously, these two are the better ones. So we figured if we had a wide enough variety of values and perspectives reflected in the three different preferred futures that we had facilitated them in building, that we had done a good job, because we had enough contrast to stress test the rules of thumb they were trying to develop for their investment philosophy to get to a better future. However, we did take on board the fact that, yeah, this was not exactly an inclusive panel, in the sense that they are all essentially captains of industry. So we did a crowdsourced evaluation of the three different futures, which at that time were known as Earthshot, Do No Harm, and After the Frugal Turn. The names have changed slightly since then. And we literally said, well, who prefers these? The crowdsourcer basically asked people to look at a short video that had very engaging little animated summaries of the three preferred futures, and asked people questions about, which one they preferred, why, what they thought it would take to create it. And this is the difference between basically participants from the global north and participants, from the global south. So a very distinct difference. After the Frugal Turn and Do No Harm are by far preferred in the global south. And in fact, you have to look really hard to even find the Earthshot. So it's over here, down in the lower right-hand corner of the preferred future. Earthshot, needless to say, is the high-tech, big money, centralized, capital-intensive future. All right, getting to how we actually create change. My last case study. Sorry, I hope I'm going a little over time, but I'm nearly the end. So you've done all this futures work. How do you actually ensure that it gets any kind of traction in an organization? As I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of work for the Law Society UK. We actually completed the report on law in the emerging bioage. We did one on severe weather, on the futures of conveyancing, the roundtable on AI, and some subsequent work on AI and the future of professions. So how do we get additional traction? Because they're all really interesting reports, and the people who were involved in them found them interesting, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the organization is engaging with them very deeply. So we wanted to meld these deep dives and create a context for strategy, and basically created a workspace called the Law Society Timeline Workboard that melded not only some of the things that were happening in their own profession, but they basically said, wow, we know this is going on and we don't acknowledge it enough. So we have two parts of the timeline. The bottom part are actual changes that are emerging in their profession that they should be dealing with strategically, and they're about to start a strategic project. And then changes that we glean from a number of Foresight projects that they've been doing, and ask them basically to think through, to identify a couple of the emerging changes that would amplify or maybe ameliorate some of the changes that were happening down on the bottom in their actual profession, which everyone found really useful because they started to see the connection between external change and internal to their profession changes they were seeing around them. So the difficulty with this is the prototyping workshop. Everyone was very excited and said, yes, this is going to work really well in strategy thinking. But then we're heading into the summer months. We just did this. We're heading into the summer months, and everyone went, well, yeah, maybe we'll think about this later. So one of the challenges to us is how do we curate all the materials we created and make them very easily applied, even without us, in their ongoing strategy discussions. And it is basically a game board workspace. So, and also, how do we use that curation and use ongoing small bits of support to amplify the work of futures thinking and future studies in their organization? So, to sum up, the driving tips of the day. Some of the things we've been struggling with, and you may be struggling with the same thing, so I'm eager to hear your responses. How you clarify your working boundaries. And this has become for us a question of, do we have a process within our own team to make sure that we are all comfortable with the ethics of what we are doing? So first of all, understanding why you're doing the work. And we have a couple of catchphrases, one of which is, positive change from the personal to the planetary, working in social change and cultural change, being clear among yourselves what you will work on, for whom, when. We've taken on some controversial clients, and quite frankly have given our team the freedom to sort of say, I don't feel comfortable working with that group, and have made clear within ourselves that we will work with someone who, for example, is currently producing a problematic product if what they are asking us to do is help them move away from that market and into something more sustainable or more healthful. Okay. Understanding the perspectives and context, which is their point of view. So, what are the concerns and priorities? How can you, in some of your initiation meetings and your first talks with the people you're working with, really understand their context? It's one of the reasons why we frequently sit down with people and say, let's do a soft systems map of your current state of play, of your current domain, of your mandates, of your responsibility. It was one of the first things we did with WOA. Seek to understand how they think about change. What is their current awareness of change? What are they currently focused on? Um, are they, how do they think about emerging changes that may be as yet unproven? If all of this is a novelty, it's going to take more time. You'll have to go slow and, quite frankly, be prepared to teach some of these basic concepts and the language. Be practical, resources. Wow, we are never good at this. So mission creep happens all the time because we get really engaged in these projects and we really enjoy this work. And so we always end up doing way more than the time budgeted. So being realistic about the resources and funding on offer. Scaling the most time intensive components. Scanning eats up huge amounts of time, and yet it's the bedrock for all of the subsequent activities. If you are going to be rigorous, right? If you are going to connect even your exploratory speculation and forecasting to data, you need to kill out the data. So scale the most time intensive components accordingly. Scope process ambitions to match. Keep it simple, stupid. Match the number of steps to the available time. We tend to get way over ambitious because, quite frankly, we have a really big toolkit of futures tools and we like using them all. We love sharing. And therein lies, mission creep. So being really, really clear and focused about what the best tools are, not just for the topic, but for the time available, for the people that you can engage and have in the room. And finally, support their team building. This comes up over and over and over again, both for people within organizations who say, I'm the only dedicated futures person in my organization. Please help. I feel so alone. So, nurturing healthy ecosystems to support futures thinking and creating communities of practice either within the organization or between the organization and their stakeholders and networks. And if you can find specific areas of interest, as with the people who are interested in space and law, really engage them because they have a personal incentive to engage in futures thinking around that particular issue. So grow that. Encourage development of their narrative for change, the how and why of the futures work they're doing and how it contributes to their day-to-day work and how it contributes to strengthening their team. Wow, laughter is so important. So, and it's also important as a way to mediate conflict, because if you're talking about futures, you're talking about contested spaces and contested values and contested ideas. So maximize interactivity, maximize the critique and the useful provocation, and in all of that, maximize humor. And work to your strengths. So we have a really strong design and sort of cultural artifact design. In our case, strong visual identity and visual focus on themes. As I said, maximize humor, interactivity, critique, useful provocation, support community building, dialogue, and conversation. And I think I've gone over time slightly in that, but I hope I've put enough little uh, pieces of mutual concern and delight out there for people to uh, react to in our conversation.